We're going to be taking up our series in Genesis chapter 32. It's 32 verses, so let's get right into it. Genesis chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And so he called that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now, and I have oxen, donkey, flocks, male and female slaves, and I have sent to tell you, my lord, in order that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, the flocks and the herds and camel, into two companies, thinking, if Esau comes to one of the company and destroys it, then the company that is left will escape. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do good to you,' I am not worthy of the least of all of the steadfast love and all of the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, and the mothers with the children. Yet you have said, I will surely do good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their number." So he spent that night there. And from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camel and their colt, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he delivered into the hands of his servants, every drove by itself. And he said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove." And he instructed in the foremost, "When Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going, and whose are these ahead of you?' then you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob, and they are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us.'" He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. "You shall say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and you shall say, 'Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he thought, I may appease him with the gift that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.'" So the present passed on ahead of him, and he spent the night. He himself spent that night in the camp. The same night he got up, took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And so he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And the man said to him, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" There he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him, and he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh meat that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip at the thigh muscle. This is Interesting passage for so many reasons. Some of those reasons we will get a chance to look at. Some of those reasons we will not, because there will forever remain a mystery. There are many scholars who are still wondering about some parts of this passage, but I think the parts that are very clear, we can still learn so much from. Let's start by recognizing that our English Bibles or our Malayalam Bibles are versed a little bit differently than in the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, chapter 32 actually starts with the last verse of chapter 31. And so the last verse of chapter 31 says, Early in the morning, Laban rose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and then he departed and returned home. And then it just continues right into Jacob went on his way. So the idea is this: we're ending the part of Jacob's saga that was intertwined with Laban. A lot of things happened in that time that he was with Laban, and we talked about many of those things in the previous parts of our series. But that part now, that time has come to an end, and Jacob is parted companies with Laban, and he's moving forward. And the very next thing that we get as he's moving forward is that he meets the angels of God. And it's a curious sort of thing because there's no surprise here. Maybe he's just so accustomed to these kinds of situations, having the whole experience, as we recall, with the Jacob's ladder. And now suddenly he's meeting angels again. We're not sure what significance this has, but it seems to be important enough to start off this transition into the next phase of his life and his life's journey. He notices that these angels are of God, or these messengers are of God, and so he calls this place as God's camp. But then he goes on to name it as Mahanaim, which literally translates to dual camps or two camps. So what are these two camps? So perhaps this is an idea that this is Jacob's camp and it's also God's camp, that there are these two camps that are somehow now next to each other, that the idea is that God is with him. It's not that God was just randomly in some place, but that these two places are together, that God is joining with him. And perhaps God has been invisibly with him all along. And we know as New Testament readers that that is the case, but now it's being made visible. So before he was with Laban and he was struggling and he had all sorts of issues during that time, but now he's going to be transitioning into another set of turmoil, which is he's going to meet his brother Esau. And as he is going to enter into this next, what we as the reader at this point in the story feels like is going to be a rather tumultuous part of the story, we're reminded that, oh, by the way, God is with him. And it sets a sort of calmness to the story. And it sets a sort of baseline trust that we can rely that God is here. There's a verse from Psalm chapter 34, verse 7 that goes like this: "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them." Jacob is going through a transition in his life. And I think now he's come to a point where he's realizing that these two camps are very significant, that God being with him is going to change how he responds and how he acts to the situations that are going to come up ahead of him. It's also it helps us to understand how he is going to face the situation. Whereas before, if you know the character of Job, you would know that he is a conniving person. Under the leadership of his mom, he tricks not only his brother, but he tricks his father. He is sneaky enough to want to send away all of the shepherds so that he gets a chance to meet his future wife. He takes matters into his own hands That's the character that he is. He's someone who grabs by the heel and doesn't let go. And now, though, with this idea that, wait a minute, it's not just Jacob. It's not all about him and what he can accomplish. And the whole story of Laban breaks him down. The fact that he was a cheating man turns the tables, and now he himself gets cheated. And finally, you get to the point where he's now coming to recognize that it's me and it's God. God is with me. Meeting Esau would have been a very scary proposition for him. We recall that Esau's kind of final words were, I'm gonna get him. As soon as I can, this was the understanding that Esau is gonna kill his brother Jacob for what he's done to him. And that's the whole reason why he fled. Jacob's whole past is about to confront him. But it's almost as if now, with this understanding that these two camps are there, you see this, first of all, the bold idea that he would actually even want to meet Esau. We don't get any inclination that he wants to meet Esau before the mention of these two camps. But suddenly, maybe it's the boldness that comes from knowing that God is with you that enables you to face that risky and scary proposition of reconciling. And it's not going to be easy because he knows that he cheated his brother. And he knows that he is going to be in the wrong. But yet he has some sort of braveness, some sort of boldness to say, let's go and let's meet him. And the way in which he meets him is a way of humility, which is, again, very counter to the original Jacob that we met when we first started all of these stories. He gets the word. Jacob gets word back from his first round of messengers. And by the way, messenger is the same word as angels, but because it's in this context, we translate it as messenger. So when Jacob's messengers return, he's a little nervous as to how to interpret the actions of Esau, because Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. That sounds a bit ominous. It sounds like some impending doom is on its way. He strategizes at this point. Jacob, perhaps this is the old Jacob, where he's trying to rely on his wit or his own merits and strength to overcome the situation or to make the best of the situation. He divides his group into two camps just in case, because if his brother Esau attacks, at least the second group will have a chance to run and escape. Though we get a sense of him strategizing, this isn't his primary strategy. His primary strategy is shown very clearly to us in verses 9 through 12. And this shows the difference that has happened in Jacob's life. Verse 10 sounds almost like it's somebody else saying it. He says this, I am not worthy of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. You see a very humble and broken down and meek Jacob at this point, who is utterly relying on God to rescue him and to save him and to bring him through this situation. He's no longer running away from his past and from his problems, but instead he is going with God and facing his problems. In one strange way, it kind of reminds me of the threefold questioning that Jesus had towards Peter, in not allowing Peter to run away from his call of being a fisher of men. And he says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And it would have been painful calling him back to face his past. And we can kind of see that this is what's happening here with Jacob. With Jacob, life was rough when he was with Laban. But now as he's re-understanding it, perhaps, he's understanding that maybe God was working on him. He's humbly leaning now more holistically on God to provide this rescue. Whereas before he would rely on his own strength and his own might, whether it be through the tricking and through the disguises, and whether it be through the rolling away, the single-handedly rolling away the stone that took several shepherds to roll away. Now he is putting all of his eggs in one basket, and that is in the basket that God carries. Though it seems like he's strategizing to minimize his losses by dividing his camp into two, what he's really doing is 100% relying on God. And now we come to this idea then that a broken man is ready to face what might be the consequences of his past actions. And we can anticipate that the consequences would be death. It would be vengeance. But before we get there, there is out of nowhere this wrestling match that occurs. And it just seems to strike every reader as so oddly placed in the narrative. He wakes up in the night and he sends all of his, at least his immediate family now forward, but somehow he stays back. And it's as if not only is there a physical wrestling match, perhaps there's also an emotional and a spiritual wrestling match that is happening within Jacob's mind that is what caused him to stay back just for a moment. Physically, we know that there was an actual wrestling match. At least that's how the Bible is portraying it. And here, who is this character that is wrestling with him? We don't know at this point in the story. It's dark, it's nighttime, so we can't see who it is. Just like Jacob didn't know who it was who he met in his bridal chamber that first time because it was dark, and there was probably other reasons then. But now also there is a shroud of mystery surrounding this character who is wrestling with Jacob. This man who is wrestling with Jacob is strong, but so is Jacob. Jacob is a tough guy, and he does not quit. It seems as though the man is stronger than he appears, because though he's wrestling with him, all it required was a touch from the man to put Jacob's hip out of socket. Now, in some of our Bible translations, it says the man struck Jacob on his hip. And yes, that is one way to translate that word. But this word also means to touch. And this word is translated that way a number of times in the Bible. One very prominent time in which this word is used in this way by a mysterious or other kind of worldly figure is in Isaiah chapter 6, where a seraph came and took a coal from the altar and touched the lips of Isaiah. That word touch is the same word that's used here to refer to how the man does something to the hip of Jacob. Now, there are some elements to this story, like we said in the very beginning, that we don't fully understand. And I'm not even going to get into some of the theories because it might just completely throw you off. But let's focus on what is clear. Jacob demands a blessing at this point. And in order to be blessed, the man asks him his name. Now, I always kind of imagine this very funny or kind of situation that may have happened to someone before, where you dial someone up and you start talking to them, and then like a few sentences in, you realize, wait a minute, do I have the right number? Who is this that I'm talking to? I've done this where someone would call my dad and I would pretend to be him, and then they would double check, like, wait a minute, who is this really? But that's not what's happening here. There's no confusion. It's not the man was randomly wrestling someone and then is wondering, wait a minute, are you the right person I'm supposed to be wrestling? No, there's something much more profound going on. When he asks, what is your name? He is asking him to admit to his character. Throughout the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, just even with the simple naming of Jesus, The act of naming was a way of describing the character of the person. Now, that seems very odd for us modern people, because how do you know the character of a person when they're a baby? You can't know. But this is the beauty of the biblical stories, and somehow how their names describe quite accurately the character. Remember, the name Jacob means to grab by the heel. Jacob was a trickster, or maybe more literally, he was a tripster. He's someone who will grab you and trip you up so that he can overtake you. When this man asks, "What is your name?" he is forcing Jacob to admit who he is. He has to come clean. Basically, this is a confession that is happening here. He can no longer escape his character, his past choices. The way that he's been living his life is all summed up in his name. Who are you? I'm Jacob. And with that act of confession, tied with the previous declaration of humility and the full reliance on God, now the blessing can be bestowed upon him. The act of grace is given to him. And what is that act of grace? That you're no longer going to be called a trickster, but instead you're going to be named Israel. Now, Israel in this context is defined as meaning because you are one who has wrestled with God and with human and prevailed. Now, what does it mean to prevail? Normally, when you prevail, you win. You utterly defeat and destroy the other person. But Jacob's not able to do that at this point. He's not defeated God. Jacob's not defeated Laban. He had to run. Jacob didn't defeat Esau because he's now very much scared of him. So where is the prevailing that's happening here, that's being described? Well, the prevailing, and this is the counterintuitive nature of our Christian faith, the prevailing is seen in the act of submission. Now, where is he submitting? He is admitting his brokenness when he declares his own name, and he is submitting not only to his brother. When you go back and read, he describes his brother as my Lord, Adonai, Adon, actually, Adon in Hebrew, which is the word, or a variation of the word that we use to describe God, Adonai, which also means capital Lord. So he's submitting to his brother, knowing that he's done wrong and asking and pleading for restoration, but he's also submitting to God, and that's seen in his request. So prevailing in this context then means bowing down, admitting our brokenness, and yielding to God and to our neighbors. This is what Jesus did. Jesus bowed down to the authorities of this world. It was not a defeat. He prevailed when he did that, because by doing that, he is ultimately giving power to God the Father. And that power was seen through the resurrection and through the ascension that we're all so much familiar with. The other idea that I think we need to draw from this is this idea of the long wrestling match meant that Jacob could not, should not give up in this wrestling with God. To be a Christian, to be Israel, means to wrestle with God, to strive with him. This is not the normal way in which we describe the Christian relationship. The normal Christian relationship might be to think of being with Jesus on that calm boat. But no, the Christian relationship is being with Jesus on that stormy sea in that boat, and wondering and wrestling with God or with Jesus. Is he going to save us? Well, it's not about doubting him. It's about clinging to him and understanding him more and not letting go of him until we get that blessing. And this is not in a prosperity gospel way, because as we've seen, the blessing entails us bowing down and humbly accepting our brokenness. This means that We have to wrestle with God when we go through our own various life experiences. In some ways, maybe this pandemic is a wrestling match with us and with God. And we're not supposed to let go. We're not supposed to give up hope and say all is lost. Whether it be the loss of a loved one, whether it be the loss of a job, or whether it be some sort of struggle within our family, you don't let go. You hold on to God in the midst of it. Those life experiences can be embarrassing at times when we are at fault. They can be painful at times when others have cheated us. But to hold on to Christ and to hold on to God means that we are able to see him face to face. Only in retrospect is Jacob able to say that this was not an ordinary man, but that he was wrestling with God himself, and that he was able to see God face to face. And that's why he named the place Penuel, or Peniel, the first time he names it. And then the second time that it's named, it's Penuel, which means the face of God. How are we able to see the face of God? By wrestling with him. By not staring at ourselves in the mirror constantly, but by instead bowing down in humility and receiving the new dignity and the new name that he gives to us. This whole concept of wrestling with God, it sounds like such a difficult thing to do. It sounds like something, why would anyone want to do that? And I agree. Probably none of us want to do that. But think of it now again in the New Testament context of Paul. Paul pleaded 3 times that this thorn would be removed from his side, that he would be free from this affliction that he saw God as giving to him. And God's response, my grace is sufficient for you. It's only through wrestling with God that we are able then to receive the grace that God gives to us. It's so counterintuitive, I know, but this is the way in which Jacob is transformed. From now on, Jacob is going to walk with a limp, and every step he takes will be a reminder he can't do it on his own, that he must rely on God. I pray that we too would be able to understand the different painful experiences in our own lives as perhaps a kind of wrestling with God. That as we walk forward with maybe our own different kinds of limps in this world, that we would be able to know that these are supposed to be reminders to us to trust in God. If we can do that, then our lives will truly have been transformed. So may the good Lord strengthen us and guide us so that we would be able to know who it is that we're wrestling, that we would not be like some of these charismatic people thinking that everything is on Satan, but that we would truly be able to understand, even as Job understood it, that the true person to wrestle with is indeed God, because he is the only one who is worth wrestling and holding on to. So may the good Lord strengthen us so that we would hold on to him in these days to come. Amen.